You're listening to DruidCast episode 223. When he arrived back, Math was fussing over the beautiful golden-haired boy who giggled and ran around the court. "His name shall be Dullen," Math shouted, and at that the boy ran from the court and out through the castle gates. He ran across the fields, followed by Math and his retinue, until he reached a high cliff, the sea crashing far below. The boy turned back to Math and his retinue and smiled.
I stand on this cliff and I look out, see the skiffs as they are rowing o'er a boundless sea. See how the castle's turning and I feel my heart is yearning to just let go, fall and to be free. I'm the son of the sea, and a wave will not break below me. I'm the son of the sea, brother to land and sky. I'm the son of the sea, and a wave will not break below me. And there in my home, I feel like I'll never die. Behind me, voices calling as the waves break on the rocks below. Eyes wide, looking, searching, then they see me from the waves emerging, and I swim free to the great whale road. I'm the son of the sea, and a wave will not break below me. I'm the son of the sea, brother to land and sky. I'm the son of the sea, and a wave will not break below me. And here in my home, I feel like I'll never die. Spray and I'm laughing, jump and play as the seals spin, and gulls they call my name. Then I hear a sailor's song and a great and long is raised high, ready to take aim. I'm the son of the sea, and a wave will not break below me. I'm the son of the sea, brother to land and sky. I'm the son of the sea, and a wave will not break below me. And here in my home, I feel like I'll never die.
No wave ever broke beneath him, and he became known as Dullan's son of the wave. It was his destiny to be killed by his uncle Gavanan the smith, and that was one of the 3 unhappy blows of the Island of the Mighty. Hello my friends, and welcome to DruidCast episode 223. I am your host Dave the Bard, and DruidCast is brought to you on or around the 20th of the month by the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. If you want to find out more about membership to the Order and our courses, you can do that at the Order's website, which is at druidry.org. Okay, some of you might be confused by that opening song, but those of you who have followed my music over the years might well recognise that short clip of Welsh mythology. That was the introduction to Dullan, Son of the Waves, that led into the song Son of the Waves from my forthcoming album, A Mabinogi, the Fourth Branch. Back in 2016, I began what would turn out to be a 10-year journey by having a dream to bring back the ancient tales of the Mabinogi to a bardic audio format that included the original translation story, but added the most up-to-date linguistic research and also included songs that would take the story forward better than just dialogue. These ancient tales were always meant to be heard, not read, my friends. The first branch of the Mabinogi came out in 2016, and the final 4th branch album is finished and currently being made by Magic into CDs and getting ready for launch as downloads, and also on all of the streaming platforms. Pre-orders open on the 6th of April, and the album will be out on the 24th of April. And I'll pop links to the places you can pre-order the CD and download in the show notes. And I am sure I will play more and tell you more about the album and the Mabinogi journey I've had next month. The talky bit this month is the wonderful Caitlin Matthews with a talk recorded at this year's Occult Conference, which was held in February at the Glastonbury Town Hall. The talk is titled, Who Are You Trying to Reach, Caller? The Voice of Magical Evocation, and is a wonderful journey through the amazing teachers and poets who have been inspired by evocation. So grab your cuppa and enjoy this month's talky bit from the Glastonbury Occult Conference with Caitlin Matthews.
The talky bit.
Good morning, everyone. Goodness, bright and early in Glastonbury on a very cold morning. So the title of my talk this morning is Who Are You Trying to Reach, Caller? The Art of Evocation. I promise we won't invoke too much here, and we'll calm it down afterwards, okay? We greet the spirits of this place as we stand upon the threshold, where world meets world in one embrace, where songs are sung and tales told. So evocation is the art of calling the gods or spirits, whether by ritual or worship or magical or theatric working. But it's something that's very little written or talked about. So In our line of business, we're doing it all the time. So I think I really wanted to take it for this topic for this morning. So, of course, the topic title refers back to the days before we had direct dialing. When you picked up the phone at home, you would get through to the operator, and the operator would put you through to the number that you required. It's usually a woman that picked up, because men didn't like the work so much. So if you were uncertain about the number, she'd be able to look it up for you and put you through. And of course, the last manual exchange closed in 1960, but I still remember having to do that. So now that we're on direct dialing, we don't need an operator anymore, and we don't even think about how all of that works. Similarly, we don't look at our own magical operations in the same way. So bear with me, if you know all of this, we're going to just slow it down a little bit so that we look at the process as we do it, and historically how it's been done. And also to some of the practitioners along the way who contributed to our understanding of this. Because we've always sought to validate the older traditions, to validate our own work, as well as looking at some of the challenges that we might face upon the way. But first of all, let's hear from Uncle Alistair and have a definition. This is a very classic one. To invoke is to call in, just as to evoke is to call forth or out. This is the essential difference between the two branches of magic. In invocation, the macrocosm floods the consciousness. In evocation, the magician, having become the macrocosm, creates a microcosm. So you invoke a god into a circle and a spirit into a triangle. So this is a statement that enters into dialogue with something that Iamblichus and Porphyry were arguing about in the 3rd century, believe it or not. This is what they were getting heated about. It's a very long-lived argument about how we define things, and I'll go back to it shortly. But basically, the ancient classical view was that you invoked the gods who were of a superior order to yourself, so gods and angels and so forth. But when you evoked, you were evoking sublunary beings who were of a lesser order, so daimons, spirits, the ancestral dead, all of those beings that live beneath the moon. So when Crowley speaks about the two branches of magic, this is what he's referring to. It's an old argument between the distinctions between high and low magic. In the late classical world, which I'm going to start off with because it's the last staging post before everything goes to pot, we have the working with the gods or angels. That meant you were doing theurgy or god work, and that this was the proper sphere of a magician, and it put you in the category of being a good person. But if you worked with daimons and random spirits or the dead, then you were doing theurgogia, or sorcery and spellcraft. Bad multitude. So let's face it, most of our magical work is spent invoking or evoking, and we use both frequently. So let's say we go to a sacred site that's dedicated to a god or spirit that we know about, and there we may evoke the being if it's indwelling the site, which isn't always the case, of course. Or it might be a site that's become dormant, in which case you would have to invoke it to have it there. But if we stand in our own temple far from that place, we may invoke the same being to be present for the duration of a rite. But I wouldn't like to define everything too closely by these high and low magic rules, to be frank. So I'm going to be a lot less particular in this talk, and I'll just lodge the distinctions here so that we're aware of them, and if we come out at the end, we'll see where we are. So the art of evocation is very much about us human beings not being able to do it all ourselves, which of course is where we go into the area of being calling upon something that's bigger than us, or as John Masefield says in The Box of Delights, "O greatness hear, O brightness hark, leave us not little, nor yet dark," which is perfect evocation of something when you're in a bit of a pickle. So the tendency of our everyday world is to separate and divide the seen and the unseen into these very polarised categories of unhelpfulness, as well as having a clear sense within ourselves that there is a greater continuum of harmony. And this is often what's drawn us all to the practice of magic and trying to make these connections and bridges between the worlds, just as the old operator made between the caller and their destination number. And this is the great work of the magician. Intention and need come together and harmonise when we want to connect with those who can most readily help us to achieve this, through the aptitudes that we already have and the prior connections that we've already made between ourselves and the greater world. So Pythagoras, who was the master of moderation and harmony, said, "The beginning is half of everything." And so we begin with words of invocation or evocation, just as the Orphic hymns call upon first those who can make the good connection. So, "Attend, O muses, to my sacred song, and learn what rites to sacrifice belong," or "Upon the stars, who are the visible symbol of the gods, to open the way to our worlds." That of all the magical tools that we can use to help us in and out and over the threshold of the apparent world with its invisible counterpart, the voice is one of the most powerful bridges. It has the sovereign advantage, of course, that we bring it with us. We don't have to pack it, it's already there. We need good breath, the poise of our body, the focus of our mind, and the liquid longing of our voice ready to pour forth. And we also need respect for those upon whom we are calling, which means we need to be in a state of preparation so that our own alignment can be perfect. Luna! Oh, mighty Luna, calmly. So back to my Iamblichus. I did promise you we'd go there. He was the 3rd century philosopher and the writer of De Mysteris on the Mysteries, and we're very indebted to him because, you know, in every time there is someone who comes along just before it's all going to go to hell in a handcart. For Glastonbury, it would be someone like, oh, his name's gone right out of my head, John Thingy, who went round and who catalogued all the abbeys and their possessions for Henry, so that we know exactly what was held everywhere around the country.
John Aubrey.
Oh, not John Aubrey. No, that's Charles I. No. John L. begins with an M. Anyway, I didn't count him down. And also in the ancient world, it was Pausanias who went and catalogued all the temples just before the edict came in, when everyone had to be Christian at the end of the 4th century. And so Iamblichus tells us all about what's happening in Egypt at that time. So his book, The Mysteries, really is a sovereign thing. And he writes that it is not from our desires and wishes that our calling upon the gods is effective, nor is it brought about by any coercion on our part. But he says, it is by virtue of the divine love which holds things together and holds all things, that practitioners provide a union of insoluble involvement, not by inclining the mind of the gods to humans, but rather disposing the human mind to the participation of the gods, leading the soul up to the gods and bringing it into accord with them through harmonious persuasion. It is for this reason, indeed, that the sacred names of the gods and other types of divine symbols that have the capacity of raising us up to the gods are enabled to link us with them. And it's also in the very name of those that we call upon that we find the creative power to change things. The 5th century Alexandrian philosopher Heracles is talking here about what sacred names do. He says, the name of a god is both a symbol and a spoken image of a creative substance, because those who first gave names to things on account of their superior wisdom revealed the powers of these things by using names like images, just as the best sculptors do. They fashioned spoken names as symbols of the thoughts of the soul, and they made of the thoughts themselves cognitive images of the things that had been thought. By tuning to the objects of intellect, they were filled with contemplation, becoming pregnant with intellectual fruits of the womb. And they applied to existing things names of such a kind that, so far as possible, represented by means of language itself the ideas of the things named, and turned those who rightly heard them back to the substances themselves. Now, everyone here understands that rather lengthy description, because we know that it's not the words of a spell or invocation by themselves that evoke the intended result, without our also imagining and holding the meaning in our consciousness. In seeking for a note of music that will evoke a divinity, for example, we first seek the divinity we want to call, and the voice goes to the right place after that. But singing random notes or gabbling odd words doesn't cut the mustard. It's by the precision of our intention that we create the aperture or the opening. And this very simple placement of mind, heart and voice is something that non-magical people rarely understand. And that's why we are smitten with so many very bad books of spells. But there is also a small print on the contract of this work. If you use your voice to evoke divinities, then you also have to be careful about what other ways you're using your voice. What else comes through our voices? Gossip, swearing, speaking dishonestly or dishonourably. They're all off the agenda. So, no traitors for you. These are the ethics which come into the territory of the sacred arts. Also the responsibility for not bothering divinities and spirits to help with the things that we can humanly achieve, or not using language that's coercive and disrespectful in our rights. So using our voices for calling upon in invocation or evocation, it's not quite the same as ordinary speaking and singing. It's not a recreational making of music, but a sending of the voice that we open space and we connect with the greater world. When we send a voice, we are walking between the worlds. We're simultaneously aware of what is here with us and aware of what is with us metaphysically. Sending our voice magically is reaching into the greater world, praying that the unseen powers will attend and aid. And it's also a window upon wonder, as well as a reawakening of knowledge, for by resounding beyond the silence that has fallen upon parts of the Western tradition, we also bring back to life many traditional levels of knowledge by our own embodiment of the primeval chants and invocations that were once sung, and also many of the dances and the ritual movements once ancestrally common and well understood. I understand this as a singer. Our invocations often open up something not heard for millennia. The clues to these older things are often in very ordinary places. A friend of ours many years ago went to visit Brittany. He was a musician. He was staying with a Breton family of musicians, and he played his small pipes for them, and they all got up and danced, which is what happens all over Brittany. And then when he got to the end of the piece, they said, "Now, son, no, you let our son play, and you can get up and you can dance." And of course, being British, he went, "Oh, I can't do that." So they said, "Well, I don't know the steps." He said, "But you know the music. If you know the music, you also know the steps." And they just could not understand what on earth he was talking about, because when we have that groundwork of the ancient music, we automatically get the steps, gestures and figures that come with it if we're going to dance. Now, anciently, we know that the temple traditions were firmly in place. We're told by Demetrius of Phalerum, he was writing in the 3rd century BCE, that in Egypt the priests, when singing hymns in praise of the gods, employ the 7 vowels, which they utter in due succession, and the sound of these letters is so euphonious that men listen to it in place of the flute and the lyre. So the temple singer's job was to actually underpin and support all the daily rituals, and to attend the clothing and the feeding of the gods' images, as well as many other tasks. And it's an important aspect of all traditions that are well established, with highly trained individuals who become literally attuned to the divinities in the temples, and that's still the same worldwide. So through the sound of the vowels intoned under the correct liturgical conditions, material existence would be transformed into spirit within these temples. And the loss of this state when the temples of the ancient world were closed involved a loss of essential skills. We can appreciate this if we look at something like a cymatic table or Pladney plate. This is where you have a table on which a selection of different materials can be placed, whether it's powders, liquids, fine grains, sand, and so on. As sound vibrations hit the table, the materials upon it reformulate themselves physically into geometric shapes and patterns. But the most notable of these patterns happens when you chant in a sacred language. If you were to sound the Sanskrit Aum, the pattern that forms on the table becomes the Sri Yantra, a visible mandala of the chant. So sound is magical. Science tells us the sound of dead stars is still resounding and reaching our planet, so it gives us some idea of how our own voices may also continue to reverberate. And sound and matter are connected, which is why nearer home we have examples of things like Merlin raising the stones from Killaris in Ireland and transporting them to Salisbury Plain, as Geoffrey of Monmouth relates, and the ancient British tradition of the perpetual choirs of song, which holds the island in peace and tranquility, which is found in some of the triads. But what about the words? Iamblichus was adamant that the sacred words themselves were capable of bringing the theurgist into a direct contact with the gods, if it was properly applied. Besides the Egyptian language, he put Mesopotamian language, Akkadian, Babylonian, Aramaic, Hebrew, Phoenician, and so on into this category. He was Syrian himself. Simply put, these older languages are what the gods were naturally used to be using to be communicated with. So this is what he says. Since the Egyptians were the first to be granted participation with the gods, they rejoice when invoked by the rites of the Egyptians. It is necessary that the prayers of the ancients, like sacred places of sanctuary, are preserved ever the same and in the same manner, with nothing of alternative origin either removed from or added to them. For this is the reason why all these things in place at the present time have lost their power, both the names and the prayers. They are endlessly altered according to the inventiveness of the Hellenes. This is a big criticism coming. The Hellenes are experimental by nature and eagerly led in all directions, having no strong foundation in them. They preserve nothing which they have received from anyone else. They quickly abandon and change it according to their unreliable linguistic innovation. This is from the 3rd century. Of course, ancient traditions are very conservative. We understand that, and innovation is very strongly resisted. But that's an old argument that's still resounding today, and I'm sure it was the same back then. That people would say, "Here, do you know in ancient Alexandria, people are still doing rites in modern Coptic. My God, you know what I mean. This is horrible." We live in an experimental age of magic now, and we strive to touch into these ancient traditions and technologies. But when we dive into prehistory, we really don't find very many intact evocations with words and music. The earliest comes from Mesopotamia, known as the Hurrian hymn. It came with words and notation. It dates from 1400 BCE, and it was found in a cache of cuneiform tablets, which were of other hymns, which are not in such good repair, unfortunately. And they were found at Ugarit, or Ras Shamra, in northern Syria, along with a 9-string lyre. And this hymn is dedicated to the goddess Nikar, who, like all the lunar deities, is also a goddess of fertility in people and in orchards. And this is a very rough idea of what the Assyriologists say I'm about to sing. I make offering to the goddess that she open her heart in love, that all my errors be forgiven. May my jars of sweet sesame oil please her, that she may look kindly upon us and make us fruitful. Like the sprouting fields of grain, may women bring forth with their husbands. May those who are virgin one day be blessed with children. So very much of our evocatory and magical methods were greatly affected by the closing of the temples in the 4th century around the Mediterranean. Some remained a little longer, like Philae, which went on to the mid-5th century. But this was a new problem for the world. What do you do when your temple is destroyed? How do you keep faith? How do you maintain your practice? All around you, everyone's being discouraged from belonging to the old ways. And the course of our whole magical tradition has been the answer to these questions, as our ancestors have tried to hand on to us all the ways that made sense to them and the adaptations they had to make along the way. So bridging this troublesome time, we find the Greek magical papyri, which date from the early period of the Hellenic settlement of Egypt through to the last troubled classical period, when people were talking about the situation in Greek that was an ongoing trauma, finding that your shrine or temple had been pulled down, its images defaced, its practitioners flogged, like Hierocles was in Byzantium, or imprisoned and starved to death. So here we see how the native Egyptian traditions of Pernita, the tradition of the god who reaches out or encompasses desires, joins with the Greek practice, shuddered at by Iamblichus, of anagogy or coercive spells to compel gods and spirits to work something binding upon a human being. These spells usually involve very strong binding and restraining curses, persuasive and seductive charms, and even the evocation of necrodemons, evoked from the dead bodies, so that like a latter-day Frankenstein, you might have your own assistant, the spirit of a deceased person, to find out things for you. Most of these spells are also using physical materials, clay tablets, plants, animal parts, and sometimes a phylactery ribbon that you would tie around your arm, or a tablet that would be inscribed with sigils or writing. But most of them required the practitioner to vibrate one or more of the barbarous names of God. This process was what animated the spell. So these voces magicae, or magical names, were the incantatory syllabic pronouncement of often very macaronic god names, scavenged or half-heard from many sources, which include Egyptian, Hebrew, and Greek god names. Since many of these spells are very long and quite unpleasant, I've just picked up one little inoffensive dream oracle spell rather than the heavy-armed coercion of many of them. So this formula is written for a practitioner who's been initiated into the specific divinity invoked here, and since he or she states that they have been enthroned by the god, it means raised up into participation with them. And these are the instructions, but I'm not going to vibrate the full list of names because we don't want to be doing all these things right now. So the instruction is, write with a copper stylus on a strip of tin foil and evoke and after crowning the strip of foil with myrtle, set up a censer. Then make a burnt offering of frankincense and tie the leaf of metal around the vapour, saying, Lords, gods, reveal to me concerning the matter in my mind tonight, in the coming hours. Emphatically I beg, supplicate, I your servant, I who am enthroned by you. And then place the piece of foil under your pillow without giving answer to anyone, and go to sleep, having kept yourself pure for 3 days. So there we are, Egyptian magic as she is, Hellenically. So what's the result of invocation and evocation? Iamblichus again here. For the illumination that comes about as a result of invocation is self-revelatory and self-willed. It is not drawn down by force, but rather proceeds to manifestation by reason of its own divine energy and perfection. It is by virtue of such a will, then, that the gods in the benevolence and graciousness unstintingly shed their light upon theurgists, summoning up their souls to themselves and orchestrating their union with them, accustoming them to turn themselves towards the eternal and intelligible first principle. In other words, the operation is successful the more that we are able to make connections. But I suppose we could also ask, do the gods and spirits actually hear and attend to us when we call? No. I'm just going to take a bit of a leaf out of the Indian book here. So we're going to hop over to look at the Rig Veda. We each have our own personal affinities with one or more of the spectrum of gods, and our gifts and aptitudes are resonant with them, creating the basis of this symbiosis. And embodying those gifts in the ways that the gods come through is a means of fully embodying ourselves, but only if we get ourselves out of the way first. So if we go into looking at celebrations in very early times in India, we find that every single noble household has a ritual celebrator and poet, the ones who brew the Soma sacrifice. And they became very anxious, you can see it in their poems, about the responsiveness of the gods, because after all, at festival time, every household is calling upon Indra, right? They're doing exactly the same kinds of things with slightly different and rather more elaborate invocations. And you hear this anxiety in them. How does Indra hear the call being called? How, hearing it, does he know the place for his unhitching? How and what comradeship with a mortal does the god enjoy at the breaking of this dawn? So there was a general fear among Vedic practitioners that, rather like a group of a hotel chain, where they're offering more and more freebies and things that you get when you go to the bathroom, more exotic benefits, trying to win the gods over to their side. And we see exactly the same thing happen when wars come over the horizon. Our God is going to fight for us, and they're going to kill everyone on the other side. So we see exactly, we're back to persuasion or coercion again. So it all comes back to the sincerity of intention and good attunement, as Marsilio Ficino, who we see here encouraging all Renaissance magicians to align themselves first with the planetary deity of their choice. Inquire diligently, what are the powers from a given star or constellation? What aspect does it have? What do they remove, these stars? What do they bring? The second rule is to note what special star rules what place or person, and to observe what kind of tones and songs belong to these regions and persons. Thirdly, observe the daily positions and aspects of the stars, and discover what principal speeches, songs, motions, dances, moral behaviour and actions most people are usually incited to by these, so that you may imitate these things as far as possible. So basically, they're looking for the right astrological hour. But you hear in this that Ficino himself, who's the only representative of a long line of medieval magic in this talk, is someone who also is trying to work out, what do you do? What do you do? How do you do it? He's actually looking for that. So what do we do when we want to honour the divinity of a place, but we do not know how to invoke the spirits in a polite and inoffensive way? The Romans were very good at this. They directly inherited from the Etruscan forerunners who have names and rites for everything. And of course, after the Babylonians, the Romans, I think, were probably the most obsessed with doing things properly and correctly, as indeed only the people could who have taken over virtually the whole of the classical world in their time. We know how from Interpretatio Romana how they conquered most of the known world, mostly by sending in augurs first before the troops went in. The augurs went in and they addressed the place and set up altars to the genii and Unoni loci there, first to persuade them that the spirits of the place would look favourably upon their invasion, and by speedily working out which of the local gods was most like one of the Roman ones. So, be you God or be you goddess. This is a formula that you can use when you have to open ground that's not been broken before. To whom this place is sacred, as it is right to offer for atonement to you a pig for the pruning of this sacred place, on account of these and other things, whether I or whether another one ordered by me offered it, in order that it might have been done rightly for the sake of this thing, I pray good prayers to you, that the sacrificing of this pig for atonement, that you may be favourable and gracious to me, to my family and house, to my children, for the sake of these things, being honoured by the sacrificing of a pig for atonement. You get the general picture here, so tied it up every which way with more subjunctives than you can imagine. But the further we track from the ancient traditions, the less cohesion there is. The temple skills have fallen away, and it's the folk customs and the occult magical revival that sought to preserve remembrance of our heritage. And they've had some very notable magical archaeologists of that kind, those who stand behind our own teachers and lineages, the ones represented in this room. They went to the door that had no key. They asked for the ancient skills to come again in ways that would work for our own times. One of these people was W.B. Yeats, who I'm going to talk about now. He not only attempted to powerfully raise the hearts and imaginations of the Irish people in their myths in an act of creating a modern nation, but also he wanted to also bring the temple traditions to his magical work and also to his vision of public ritual theatre. I regard him as one of the key magical archaeologists of the art of evocation. I'm just going to take one unregarded and overlooked example of this so that we can see how he used it. When Yeats and Edwin J. Ellis started on their edition of William Blake in just before the 1890s, they had the difficulty that no one at that time actually understood Blake's mythology in any unified way. It remained to most people's minds as sort of the ravings of a genius madman. These were the days before the work that was done by our late friend Kathleen Raine, who published her own study Blake and Tradition in 1969, and long before S. Foster Damon had compiled his Blake Dictionary in 1973. It took that long to work it out. The main problem was that Blake left no glossary to help decode his considerable body of work. So if any of you looked into the longer poems of Blake, you're aware that you're in the presence of this very precise mythology with named individuals, mythic places, and a systematised mythos whose key you just don't possess. And so Yeats set about the unwieldy task of decoding Blake with his magician's hat on, to the extent that the critic Northrop Fly charged the editors with approaching Blake from the wrong side of Blavatsky. So Yeats believed that Blake's vision was a direct path to spiritual reality and crossing his own physical and mental boundaries so that he could enter into other minds. But what to other people seemed like insanity, Yeats saw as a divine revelation, arguing that Blake perceived these spiritual forms with which he talked and argued as a dialogue with old friends. So he reasonably used the guidance that he'd followed in the archaeology of his own magical formation. And you can see this in his essay, Magic, of 1901. The seeds of his own mythic and magical system appear there for the first time. He posited that the borders of the mind are ever shifting and that many minds can flow into one another, as it were, and create or reveal a single mind, a single energy. That the borders of our memories are shifting, and that our memories are a part of one great memory, the memory of nature herself. That this great mind and great memory can be evoked by symbols. So having had a theosophical, Kabbalistic and Hermetic education, Yeats could very readily discern the fourfold nature of Blake's vision, much of which was based upon the writings of Burma through the window of Swedenborg, while reaching back into biblical and classical texts, which would have been available to him through the recent translations of Thomas Taylor, the Platonist. So Yeats then continued his research by applying himself in this way to Blake's symbology. And so we'll just briefly look at that. The quaternity division which characterises all of Blake's system, Yeats saw was a return to the magical sense of space, to the four cardinal points, as well as the zenith, the nadir, and the centre and the circumference, which Blake was presumed to have borrowed from the medieval Kabbalistic tradition. This is how Blake himself describes his own core of system. There are four universes around a mundane egg which remain chaotic. One to the north, called Orthona, one to the south, named Horizon, one to the east, named Luva, one to the west, named Tharmas. They are the four Zoas that stand around the throne divine. So, working from Blake's own system, Yeats attended to the master's poetry as to a lost ritual system, believing implicitly that this vision held enduringly within the metaphysical reality, and within the infinite and eternal space made of thought and imagination. So accordingly, he attended to these fourfold directions with their gods and elements, and he literally invoked the names of these divinities in order to find out what came of it, basing his work on what he discovered. So, just the four directional names, he literally chanted. So it would be Luva, Horizon, Tharmus, Orthona. And his evocation of the divinities was an act of radical re-remembering, even if his method of rediscovering was truly offensive and upsetting to the literary establishment. It was a daring Rosicrucian experiment which gave a partial opening into the world of Blake, who himself called the contraction of the infinite into the finite as Ulro, while the spiritual abode of Eden was its expansion, which is how we would understand from a Kabbalistic perspective the pillar of severity upon the tree, which involves the principle of contraction, and the pillar of mercy as the principle of expansion. So he was on the right lines with his evocation, and he adopted a method resonant with his own vision, bringing these ancient skills of invocation and evocation also into ritual and ritual theatre. From being a child, he'd always wanted to hear poems spoken to the harp, he wrote, just as the ancient bards did. But as a poet, he tried to find how evocation could work on stage and in ritual, because ritual theatre was really important to him because it worked on the imagination. So he turned to an instrument maker, Alfred Dolmesch, who was one of those foundational people in the recovery of early music, and to the performer Florence Farr to help him. And Florence Farr, of course, became the exponent of this form of speaking poetry, which he called cantillation. So Yeats wrote, Arnold Dolmesch made us a beautiful instrument, half psaltery, half lyre, which contains, I understand, all the chromatic intervals within the range of the speaking voice. And he taught us how to regulate our speech by ordinary magical notes. Some of these notations he taught us, like the one I'm just about to give you, out of the first act of the Countess Kathleen. So this is sort of real, trying to get it right in a very on the way. This is actually notated speech for the Countess Kathleen. Impetuous youth, be still, be still. Your sorrowful love may never be told. Cover it up with a lonely tune. He who could bend all things to his will, his covered the door of the infinite fold with the pale stars and the wandering moon. George Bernard Shaw wasn't quite so happy about this. He called Farr's chanting a nerve-destroying crooning. Yet Ezra Pound and all of the other sort of 20th century modernists took note They were very much influenced by these performances, which add more incantatory and musical elements to their poetry. But other practitioners were also paying attention as the temple traditions began to return to our world. And it's not a coincidence that those who were ushering in the return of magic to the world from this period were also people who were trained in musical and theatrical performance. My own teacher, the late Dolores Ashworth-Nowicki, was trained as an opera singer. She's the only Wagnerian soprano of Jersey. I was trained for the theatre myself. And the late Patricia Crowther and her husband Arnold were performers from the era of music hall, the Punch and Judy show, and the pantomime. And this old craft of performance still embodies the ancient art of ritual evocation, whereby the fourth wall of the auditorium is never broken because a magical rite is happening on stage, whether it be a Shakespearean drama or just the booth of Mr. Punch. But the mistress of evocation herself, Dion Fortune, was also influenced by what Yeats' Irish magical revival was attempting. She purposely wrote her novels to evoke real states and create resonances that would make it easier for people to understand and embody magical concepts. She realised that the reality of magical work is very difficult to grasp in a non-fictional means, and that people need rituals which begin with the composition of place, an evocation of a scene so that a real connection can be made and ritual transactions move from other world to our world. Of course, it's the same method that the Jesuit St. Ignatius of Loyola was using in the 15th century himself. But within her magical novels, D.F. shows us that ordinary people become gradually into resonant rapport with the mighty gods, just how we begin to walk the pathways of the inner worlds, and also showing what changes come about. She helped educate and reweave the means by which modern people might join hands with the tradition of their forebears in sacred ways, despite living in an unequal society at the time, under conventional and the undying and undynamic hand of religious outlook, which robbed everyone of their vitality. So in each of these novels, a man and a woman have the power cables of the ancient reawakening that works from the sexual level right up to the high magical level working, thrust back into their hands so that they can live lives of deep magical connection. And by that means, she uses to convey this transmission is this traditional evocation by means of poetry and song. The sea priestess is full of the lore of Atlantis, magnetizing the asthmatic and henpecked Wilfrid into singing the songs that call the goddess to awaken his nature. In moon magic, the priestess sings the temple songs of Egypt to the self-sacrificing Rupert, and retuning him to his purpose. And the deeply deprived soldier, Alex Murchison in The Winged Bull, calls upon the power of the Babylonian Lamassu in the British Museum and to the god Pan, and he's restored to his rightful strength. While in the Goatfoot God, the humiliated socialite Hugh pursues a very dilettante series of ever surer pathways until he rediscovers the simpler joys of Pan. Now, I don't know if D.F. was a good singer. She certainly had the chest capacity if we look at any of her pictures. But this is one of the evocations from the Sea Priestess. It's from the end of the book when Wilfrid's secretarial wife, Molly, has begun to attune to the power of the goddess. I am the star that rises from the sea, the twilight sea. All tides are mine and answer unto me, tides of men's souls and dreams and destiny. Ice is veiled and air been again. Lo, I receive the gift thou bringest me, life and more life in fullest ecstasy. I am the moon that draweth thee. I am the waiting earth that calleth thee. Come unto me, great Pan, come unto me. Come unto me, great Pan, come unto me. So new times and modern technologies have brought us different modalities. A lot's changed and much has been rediscovered through study, research and personal experimentation. We're all still trying to some degree to toggle the ancient and modern traditions together, sometimes as a form of continuity, sometimes as just resonant descendants of our revered magical forebears. But we're now in an era since COVID also of the ghastly online ritual, with groups scattered around the world where any kind of sound is completely mashed up by the very mode that we're actually using to communicate. So I suspect that we'll be continuing our rituals in person, as we've always done. That's not going to change. But I am reminded of the Hermetic Kore Cosmo, which is a wonderful text, where Isis relates to Horus how the gods were invited to imbue human beings with divine gifts. And it's Hermes who says, "And I will endow human nature with wisdom, temperance, persuasion and truth, nor will I cease to ally myself with invention. I will ever protect the mortal life of such people as are born under my signs, seeing that to me the Creator has attributed to the zodiac signs of knowledge and intelligence. Above all, when the movement which draws thereto the stars is in harmony with the physical forces of each." Hermes gives us the words, he gives us the technology. Aphrodite lends the beauty. The sun gives us the illumination and the moon memory. Kronos gives us justice and necessity. Ares gives us zeal and Zeus the hope. All of these make us prompt to evoke the help and praise the rainbow spectrum of divinity with our voices. And some of us here today, personally, or for your teachers perhaps, there were no elders, there was no magic self, there were no temples. Our teachers were the pupils of teachers still living in a world where when you went to the lodge, you covered your body with a robe and your head with a hoodwink or a mask, so you couldn't be identified by your lodge mates, just in case he was your bank manager or something. That was the era of truly occult teaching. And my teachers were among the first to open this out. It was beginning from the end of the 19th century, but they helped kick it along the road. And to find other ways of working that were without suspicion and fear. And long may indeed we live without that. So the voice of evocation is still heard, not only in ritual circles, but in the therapy room, where those needing healing can hear and remember the landscape of their soul. And in our time, there are many magicians, magical scholars, researchers, and those who put their body in the place, who have sought out some of the original sources of our craft and found new beginnings. We ourselves have gone to the places long abandoned or overcome by other traditions. We have learned through our praying and invocation. We have experimented alone and with others. We're all a work in progress. We're not finalised. We're continuing an ancient tradition. All we as dancers in our circling round, in imitation of the star's own glory, seek out the God's own dancing ground as we attempt to tell their story. We are not tablets unengraved, not blanks, but books eternally unscrolling. The writer writes us, though we give no thanks. Sometimes we miss the soundless words unrolling. We learn as in the twinkling of a dream, but on awakening, learning slips away as tides that turn from littorals marine, leaving the shore quite dry and we berayed. But within us all, the Maker's seeds are sown, each sparkling grain a world potentially remembered, at first a scintillation all unknown, at last an ancient knowledge reassembled. So into the greater memory of the eternal and ever-renewing convocation of magicians, May our work of evocation renew, heal, and awaken the world. Now peace above and peace below, and on all sides surrounding, the tide of peace now spreading go, and in our hearts abiding.
I grew up seeing things a little differently, appearing, disappearing, hardly innocent, nor tied down to the ground. I learned to roll and tumble with the punches, glory in my stripes and spots, walk by invisible and never make a sound. But heavy is the crown that's always hidden, tender is the heart you never see. Hard and fast shines the grin that we flash, but there's a vulnerable stripe or two on me. Maybe any place outside of Wonderland is not for me, my friend. If I leave my grin behind, remind me that we're all mad here, and it's okay. Sun up, sundown, the shadows hide me down in Wonderland. Wonderland, nobody knows the way, but if you find it in your dreams, you can find it at your day job, somewhere south of hell. Take the path to left or right with just your gut to guide you. The story is not for anyone else to tell. Go down the rabbit hole and out the other side. You can't go home in the middle of the magic carpet ride. You gotta greet the sun before his lovely daughter moon. You can't forsake the journey for the safety of your room until you learn your lesson well. I have learned to see and hear everybody loud and clear, but the truth comes down in riddles that are safe enough to share. That's how it is in songs you see, and stripes always looked good on me, whether or not I'm really there. Heavy is the burden of the wise ones, when no one understands a word they say. The Jabberwock never bothered anyone, but nobody believes him to this day. Hey, and why should they? If I leave my grin behind, remind me that we're all mad here, and it's okay. Sun up, sundown, the shadows find me out in Wonderland. Wonderland, nobody knows the way, but if you find it in your dreams, you can find it at your day job, somewhere south of hell. Take the path to left or right with just your gut to guide you. The story is not for anyone else to tell. Gotta greet the sun before his lovely daughter moon. You can't forsake the journey for the safety of your room until you learn your lesson well. Learn your lesson well. Learn your lesson well. Learn your lesson well. Is it the stripes or the spots you see? Was it hearts or diamonds, baby, brought you here to me? Darling, you know better than to trust a pack of cards. What have we learned? The world is never as mad as it could be. Never as mad as it could be. If I leave my grin behind, remind me that we're all mad here, and it's okay. I promise. If I leave my grin behind, remind me that we're all mad here, and it's okay. If I leave my grin behind, remind me that we're all mad here, and it's okay. If I leave my grin behind, remind me that we're all mad here, and it's okay.
The Glastonbury Occult Conference is a wonderful event, so do go along next year if you can get there. And after the talk, you heard my bardic buddy S.J. Tucker with one of my favourite songs of hers, Cheshire Kitten, We're All Mad Here, from her classic album, Mischief. Love, and huge amounts of hugs to you, Suge. Well, this music means we are approaching the end of the show, but before I go, let's have the results of last month's competition. The prize was a copy of Bride's Healing, Ireland's Celtic Medicine Traditions by Gina McGarry, and the question I asked was, Bride is connected to a sacred flame in Ireland. Where is that sacred flame? Well, the answer is Kildare, and the first name drawn from the hat and winner of that great book is Lily Savage from Blakeview, Australia. Congratulations, Lily. That book will be with you as soon as the post allows. The prize this month is a copy of Caitlin's brilliant book, Singing the Soul Back Home, Shamanic Wisdom for Every Day. And the question I'd like you to answer is, the Occult Conference is an annual event held in a small West Country town with connections to Arthurian legend. What is the name of that town? The Occult Conference is an annual event held in a small West Country town with connections to Arthurian legend. What is the name of that town? Easy one this month, my friends. Email your answer along with your full postal address to podcast@druidry.org, and one of you will win that fabulous book. And again, please be reassured we do not keep hold of your information. Once that book has been posted, all of the details that have been emailed into the office are deleted. We do not use them for any other purpose. It just saves me chasing the winner around the internet. Well, so my friends, that is a show. Have a wonderful equinox celebration. I am so happy the spring equinox here, and those daffodils, those happy spring flowers, have been really lifting my spirit. Whether you're celebrating the spring here or the autumn for all of our friends in the southern hemisphere, have a blessed time, and I will see you next month for DruidCast episode 224. Until then, I wish you all peace and blessed be. Goodbye.